All right, we are continuing on with this series on this book here, Mastery by Robert Greene, and we're going to particularly talk about, this is one of my favorite books here, just in terms of like what it teaches you about leveling up in any skill, like really getting to a high level of skill and stuff. Honestly, if you follow the advice in here, you will be crazy successful, because this is based off of history. You know, we talked a lot about it in the last video. Definitely check that one out if you haven't seen it. The original video we did on mastering cybersecurity, kind of play on words here, talking about mastery. I was originally going to skip over this section, but I must say, like, after rereading it, I got to cover it. This is the introduction section of this book. Now, by the way, if you haven't read this book already, if you don't have this book, I would highly recommend to get it. You know, you don't have to get the physical book. You can get it on Audible if you prefer audiobooks, as I typically do. I actually have it. I actually have this book as an ebook. I have the physical book and the audiobook, so that's how much I like it. I don't get any kickback or anything for it, but this is just my own personal recommendation. Highly recommend reading it on the side, at least at some point. But yeah, in this introductory section, really what he does is, Robert Greene, he breaks down a lot of myths that maybe some of you guys might have. It's very common to sort of think this way, right? Because this is how society has kind of ingrained upon us to think that, becoming a master at something is the result of genius, or, is very genetically like inborn talent kind of based. But he really goes to disprove that and provide some historical examples and evolutionary examples as well, just straight off the gate in this introduction chapter here. Now, the very first kind of point that he brings up that is, I think, really good little illustration here is he starts to talk about our ancestors, like in the hunter-gatherer days, like, our ancestors in Africa that walked out into the savannah to hunt. They were under 5 feet tall, and they were, I didn't know that even, but they were like under 5 feet tall, and, their brains weren't as developed. And they were trying to figure out how to create tools and stuff like that. They're just trying to survive. They needed to go out in the savannah to hunt, but every time they did that, they were, prey to all these other animals out there that were higher up on the food chain, right? And he talks about even like that, how we were just kind of innately, we developed to be, really focused, do deep focus on one thing. And he even gives the example of how, because our eyes are close together, all the primates that had their eyes, close together like that, it was to focus on one thing, versus the animals, like giraffes and stuff that have eyes on like the sides of their head. They can't really see they can't really focus in as deeply on one thing. They more see like a panoramic view, but out of like the necessity of survival, depending on whether you believe in like the evolution stuff or not, but I'm just saying, like, a lot of how we are as humans is pretty much made for this deep focus, this type of mastery, because he really defines mastery as that state of deep focus when you can just get stuff done without any distraction, really. You're just like, you lose track of time, the feeling where you're just really locked in on something. Certainly if you guys have been going for OSCP or doing CTF, sometimes, you just really get lost in it. You really get lost in what you're doing, and that's when you do some of your best work, when you're really deep focused like that. And he talks about basically how when you reach that level of mastery in something, you actually have command over that state of mind. Because, right now, you're probably not able to tap into that deep focus state anytime. It kind of comes and it goes, and you're kind of at the mercy of it, right? But he talks about how the greatest masters, they actually have control over that. And then he goes on to, along with the whole hunter-gatherer type examples, one of the things I really liked about was when he talks about the relationship with time, and he says that we're normally in the hunter-gatherer days, our relationship of time was that of like decay, right? Like the longer they spent out there hunting, the more at risk they were, right, to become prey themselves to these other animals out there. But then he talks about how It says that we can say the evolutionary relationship to time fundamentally altered the human mind itself and gave it a particular quality or grain. When we take our time and focus in depth, then we trust. When we trust that going through a process of months or years will bring us mastery, we work with the grain of this marvelous instrument that developed over so many millions of years. We infallibly move to higher and higher levels of intelligence. We see more deeply and realistically. We practice and make things with skill. We learn to think for ourselves. We become capable of handling complex situations without being overwhelmed. And following this path, we become Homo Magister, man or woman, the master. But then, like, conversely, what he also says is that to the extent we believe we can skip steps, avoid the process, magically gain power through political connections or easy formulas, or depend on our natural talents, we move against this grain and reverse our natural powers. We become slaves to time. As it passes, we grow weaker, less capable, trapped in some dead-end career, and, et cetera, et cetera. He goes on. But yeah, that's a really good point, because a lot of people, they're always looking for the shortcut, right? Like, what is this trick, the tip, the trick, the secret to success, right? And certainly on the OSCP, I'm sure we've all been victim at some point of kind of thinking this way, right? Like, what are the 5 steps that I need in order to get the certification, right? What is the secret sauce to getting OSCP without hard work and struggle? The only way that you're going to be able to get your certifications, the really difficult ones, right, or reach this level of mastery in your field, is you're going to have to, just allow time to work for you, right? Like, put in the work and, consistently show up, and you'll cultivate these skills over time. But, there is no shortcut really for this. And this is something that is based throughout history. You can look, and there'll be a lot more examples coming up in this book as far as that is concerned. Now, he also kind of lays out the sort of 3 stages to this whole attaining mastery thing. So the first he calls apprenticeship, the second he calls creative active, and the third he defines as mastery. Now, basically, in the apprenticeship phase, I'll just go ahead and quote him here. He says, "We stand on the outside of our field, learning as much as we can of the basic elements and rules. We have only a partial picture of the field, and so our powers are limited." And then he says, in the second phase, through much practice and immersion, we see into the inside of the machinery, how things connect with one another, and thus gain a more comprehensive understanding of the subject. With this comes a new power, the ability to experiment and creatively play with the elements involved. And in the third phase, our degree of knowledge, experience, and focus is so deep that we can now see the whole picture with complete clarity. We have access to the heart of life, to human nature, and the natural phenomenon, right? So that's pretty much throughout this book. We're going to go throughout that process, right? In the very beginning, we're kind of starting from, not having, let me get this in focus here, not having that insider knowledge of our field. We're kind of at the outside looking in. We're developing our skills. We're going to have to kind of follow other people and learn from others, and really try to imitate, what they do, and really just get a foothold on our own knowledge. Once we reach a certain level of proficiency is when we can start experimenting and kind of going off and doing some stuff on our own, and you're kind of just expanding the knowledge, kind of with that scientist mentality, right? That's what he talks about with the creative active, right? And then mastery, then that is the phase where you can really do some amazing work, and you have access to the full spectrum of knowledge there. But he also mentions how, it's not a linear path to mastery. It's not a linear path to the end. Your entire life is basically, a journey towards mastery. It's not something you just attain and then that's it, right? You're constantly learning, right? You're constantly growing. That's something he emphasizes that I really like as well. Now, to a lot of people that might be a little bit skeptical with, they still might be on the fence about this, thinking that, your natural inborn talent, your IQ, your genetics is the most important thing, right? I like to talk about fitness a lot on the channel. there's times where, I mean, there's a lot of people out there that would believe that genetics, right? And then you that's been disproven when you find out that, okay, if I eat healthy, I go to the gym, I can look pretty darn good as well. But, when it comes to being masters at something, especially something really difficult like cybersecurity or whatever it may be, you might think that IQ and being smart and genetically gifted is a huge thing. But what he says is, he gives an example, I think this is really good, of Sir Francis Galton and his older cousin Charles Darwin. And he says, by all accounts, Galton was a superior genius with an exceptionally high IQ, quite a bit higher than Darwin's. These are estimates done by experts years after the invention of the measurement. And he says Galton was a boy wonder who went after an illustrious scientific career, but he never quite mastered any of the fields he went into. He was notoriously restless, and as is often the case with young child prodigies. Darwin, by contrast, is rightly celebrated as the superior scientist, one of the few who has forever changed our view of life. As Darwin himself admitted, he was a very ordinary boy, rather below the common standard in intellect. He kind of goes on from there, but that's an interesting distinction. So what is it really? Obviously, there was something different between the two of them. Now, what he equates to it is your natural inclination. You see, Darwin had more of a passion for the sciences than his more gifted, higher IQ cousin, Sir Francis Galton. So with that sort of natural interest, right? That what you might call passion, and that curiosity, and he was constantly trying to learn more because he was fascinated by it, right? Because of that, he ended up putting in more time, putting in more work, more deep focus, and he ended up becoming the superior scientist. So if there's any genetic component to it, is what is your natural inclination? What do you find yourself losing track of time doing, right? And in the next video on this on Mastery, we're going to go through this section that's all about discovering your life's calling and all of that. But this is just one really good introduction to show you just how this is one of the separating factors, right? Because if you have a passion for it, if you have a natural inclination towards it, if security is something that is interesting to you, don't worry if you're not that good at it yet. You're gonna be able to get really good at it if you have that desire to learn. And then one of the other things that he talks about here, is basically just explaining how your inborn talents are not everything like society kind of makes it out to be, right? Well, here's a good quote by Friedrich Nietzsche, right? Do not talk about giftedness, inborn talents. One can name great men of all kinds who were very little gifted. They acquired greatness, became geniuses, as we put it, through qualities the lack of which no one who knew what they were would boast of. They all possessed that seriousness of the efficient workman, which first learns to construct the parts properly before it ventures to fashion a great whole. They allowed themselves time for it, because they took more pleasure in making the little secondary things well than in the effect of a dazzling whole. Now that, I think, is a very powerful quote, right? Focus on the little things. Don't get so caught up in becoming a master of cybersecurity, becoming the most elite hacker, right? Put more effort and, put more emphasis on learning the little things, right? Like, learning how to do your recon, learning how to, use this tool or that tool, how to enumerate this service, that service. Put more of a focus on the individual things that you're working on, whatever it is, that smaller picture. And over time, allow time to play on your side. Over time, you're going to keep learning more and more, and that's going to expand. And before you know it, you're going to be really skilled, and you're going to be approaching mastery in cybersecurity as a whole, right? But you want to put more of a focus on those secondary things than the dazzling whole, right? Because that's a lot of people like to focus on the flashy, aspect of being good at being an elite hacker, right? Or getting like the OSCP. I mean, that's great, but focus on what you need to learn to get the OSCP first, right? Instead of just focusing on the whole of getting OSCP, focus on learning recon, learning how to modify exploits, right? Learning how to do buffer overflows, all this stuff. And I guarantee you, if you focus on these, what they call secondary, aspects, you will eventually be able to reach that, the dazzling hole, if you will. So I hope this video was of help to you guys. I'm going to be making more. We're going to be going through section by section. This was the introductory section, and next we'll be going over the first section, which is all about discovering your life's calling. So it should definitely be a good one. I know this video is getting kind of long, but be sure to subscribe if you've been enjoying it so far. Hit the like button. It helps get the message out there, and I will see you guys in the next video.